The butter sizzled softly as it met the hot pan. The golden sound of Tuesday. Julian Rios tilted his head just slightly, listening not just for the sound of the crust forming, but for the rhythm of the kitchen, the hum of familiarity, the quiet joy of doing something exactly right. He pressed the bread gently with the back of his spatula, just enough to encourage that perfect crisp inside. 3 kinds of cheese-aged cheddar, fontina, and a delicate touch of Havarti were already melting into one another. The sandwich would be golden, decadent, simple. It always was. The soup simmered in the copper pot behind him, scent rich with roasted heirloom tomatoes, garlic, freshly plucked basil from the greenhouse just beyond the south window. A swirl of cream waited nearby, ready to be drizzled. At the last moment, kitchen itself, spacious, immaculate, and sun-drenched, was as familiar to Julian as his own breath. Spices were alphabetized, knives perfectly honed. The counters glowed under the sunlight that poured in from the wide glass doors facing the ocean. He had carved a life here, not just a job. 3 years, every Tuesday, the same ritual. Grilled cheese and tomato soup for Keanu Reeves, not because it was extravagant, but because it meant something. Keanu once told him it was the meal his mother made when he was sick. That little boy comfort still mattered, even after decades of fame. So Julian made it with reverence. Each week, a ceremony of warmth and care. He plated the sandwich diagonally, just as Keanu liked, and wiped the rim of the bowl with a cloth before pouring the cream in a gentle spiral. 2 basil leaves angled opposite, precise, calming, perfect. He warmed the tray. 2 small things mattered. It wasn't food, it was presence. Then came the final touch. He reached for the wooden spoon, old worn smooth from decades of stirring. It had once belonged to his grandmother, Mama Rosa. She had taught him to cook with his senses, not recipes. Taught him to feed people, not impress them. Julian tapped the spoon once, gently, on the edge of the soup bowl. Always once. A small, quiet act of gratitude before serving. It grounded him. He was about to place the tray on the service counter when he heard footsteps sharp, unfamiliar. Not Keanu, not house staff either. Something formal in the rhythm. Julian turned, drying his hands on a towel. Nadia, Keanu's new assistant, stepped into the kitchen. Polished, efficient, polite but not warm. She carried a sealed white envelope, her expression unreadable. "Hey, Nadia," Julian offered, keeping his tone light. "Lunch is ready right on time." She didn't smile. "Julian, I need to give you this." She extended the envelope. He looked at it. His name was typed across the front. No handwriting, no decoration. A chill traced the back of his neck. "What is it? You should read it." The kitchen fell silent. Only the gentle bubble of the soup filled the space as he tore open the seal and unfolded the letter. His eyes moved over the first line. He stopped breathing. "Dear Mr. Rios, your services as private chef are no longer required. This termination is effective immediately. Please collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises within 10 minutes. No explanation. No signature. Just a printed letterhead from the estate's management company." His hands trembled. There's some mistake," he said, voice breaking. "Just spoke with Mr. Reeves yesterday. We finalized next week's menu." He was excited about the halibut. Nadia's eyes dropped. "I was only told to deliver the letter. I'm sorry." Security would arrive in moments. Not even enough time for a conversation. Not even enough time to ask why. He turned toward the plated lunch. The grilled cheese was beginning to cool, cream spirals sinking into the soup. It wouldn't be eaten. It would be discarded. Julian walked slowly to the drawer, pulled out his knife roll, reached for the shelf, took the spoon. His grandmother's spoon. He held it gently, still faintly scented with butter and rosemary. He didn't look back as he left the kitchen. The place he had loved, honored, served, outside the sunlight was still warm, but nothing inside him felt steady. He walked past the security guards without a word, across the polished stone walkway, down to his car. His hands shook as he opened the door. He placed the knife roll in the passenger seat, the wooden spoon in his coat pocket where it pressed against his chest as he started the engine. The scent of tomato and basil lingered faintly on his shirt. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just drove away, soup still on the counter behind him, untouched. The apartment was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft tap of Julian's keys dropping onto the counter. He stood in the doorway for a long time, coat still on, the wooden spoon still pressed against his ribs like a secret. He couldn't let go. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and dried rosemary, the last traces of the home he barely had time to acknowledge between shifts. But now, time stretched out before him, like an empty plate. No appointments, no schedule, no reason to cook. He moved on instinct. Water, sink, splash. His face stung from the cold. He stared at himself in the mirror above the faucet, eyes tired, jaw tight, disbelief still heavy behind the silence in his bones. Then came the rage, not loud, not explosive. It was quiet and hot, like oil burning on a pan too long. His hands trembled as he pulled off his coat, folded it too carefully, and set it on the back of a chair. He sat at his tiny kitchen table, the one with a deep scratch down the middle and a loose leg that wobbled when he leaned too hard and opened his laptop. He clicked the icon labeled Mama Rio's draft lease. The document filled the screen, a mix of numbers, diagrams, and a dream that felt suddenly ridiculous. $40,000 and change. That's what he had saved. Tip by tip. Bonus by bonus. Holiday meals, overtime hours, every Tuesday ritual that felt like faith. He had poured it all into the hope of one day opening a place of his own, not a restaurant, a refuge. He stared at the number and felt nothing. Then he looked at the fridge inside, a red onion, 3 eggs, a wedge of cotija cheese, 2 sticks of butter, 1 half-used leftover rice, and a jar of salsa he made 2 weeks ago. He began pulling things out. Not because he was hungry, because he didn't know what else to do. He cracked the eggs, diced the onion, and stirred the mixture with the wooden spoon, the one thing that still felt like home. When it was done, he plated it on his only white dish. He sat down, took 1 bite, and closed his eyes. The flavor was nothing extraordinary, but it was warm. It was honest. It reminded him of being 10 years old, sitting at the corner of Mama Rosa's table after school, when life was hard but somehow still gentle. When he opened his eyes again, the silence had changed. The city outside pulsed in the background, horns, sirens, someone shouting across the alley. But inside him, something had shifted. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and pulled open a drawer he rarely touched. Inside was a wrinkled envelope marked city permits, and he stared at it for a moment. Then his phone buzzed. A message from a former co-worker. Heard what happened. Total crap. But man, if you ever go solo, I'm in. Julian read it twice. He walked back to the fridge, opened it again. Same ingredients, same limits. But now, they looked like possibilities. He didn't need a building. Not yet. He needed a stove, folding tables, paper bowls. He didn't need perfection. He needed fire. He opened his browser. Search. Pop-up food permits. Los Angeles. Click. Scroll. Church parking lots. Community centers. Farmers markets, places that didn't need reservation books. Branding consultants or etched wine glasses. He started writing a list. Rice, eggs, soup, tacos, sweet tea. Grilled cheese, of course. Every item came with a face, a memory. When someone felt less alone, he was going to cook again. Not for Keanu, not for critics, not even for stability. He was going to cook for the people who sat in line behind dumpsters, who slept under cardboard near the 405, who clutched plastic forks like precious silver. He thought about that last tray still sitting on the counter. At the estate untouched, unworthy of a goodbye. No one had eaten that grilled cheese, but tomorrow. Someone would, and that someone wouldn't just taste bread, butter, cheese. They would taste purpose. At 2:34 a.m., Julian finished finalizing his grocery list. He stared at the total, $312.06, more than he had in checking. But close enough. He leaned back, heart pounding, not with fear, but with something else. Resolve, at 3:01 a.m. He stood at the edge of his apartment window and looked down at the sleeping city. It was fractured, hurting, complicated, but it was hungry, and tomorrow he'd feed it. The sky over Los Angeles was still dark when Julian Rios stepped into the small commercial kitchen behind Street, Jude's outreach center. The air was cold, metallic. The tiles beneath his feet were cracked and yellowed, and the fluorescent lights above flickered like they were waking up too. He flicked the switch for the ovens and listened for the hum dash alive. He hadn't been here in years. The last time he was just another volunteer ladling chili beside elderly women with arthritic wrists and stories about dead husbands. Now, he was back, this time with a plan and a fire that wouldn't go out. A few friends had answered his midnight texts. David, a retired dishwasher who used to clean for Julian in a downtown kitchen. Lonnie, a single mother who worked 3 jobs and still found time to bake cupcakes for neighborhood kids. And Nate, a security guard with a tattoo of a fork on his arm and a memory of sleeping on the same sidewalk Julian had passed on his way here. They all showed up. It's no questions, no contracts. It's just aprons and open hands. They brought bags of ingredients from their own kitchens, some scraped together from corner stores. Lonnie brought 6 loaves of bread and a block of cheddar. Nate brought 3 gallons of tomato juice and a bundle of onions. Julian brought the spoon. No menu, no expectations. Just one rule. Cook like you love the person you're feeding. The sun hadn't risen yet when they began. The room filled with motion, onions sizzling, bread frying, soup bubbling. No one spoke unless they had to. It was all eyes and nods, muscle, memory, and rhythm. The first batch of grilled cheese sandwiches was golden and imperfect. The soup tasted slightly too salty until Julian balanced it with cream and a touch of honey. Lonnie folded napkins into triangles. Nate checked the paper bowl count like a general before battle. They had enough for maybe 80 meals, if they stretched. Outside, the first people were already arriving. Not crowds, just shadows at first. A man in a wheelchair with plastic bags tied to the handles. A woman holding a child wrapped in a hotel blanket. A group of teenage boys who pretended not to look hungry. Julian stepped outside. His apron stained, his eyes red from chopping onions. "We're almost ready," he said, voice steady. The woman with the child nodded. "We're not going anywhere." By 7 a.m., the line stretched around the block. Word had spread fast. Someone was cooking hot food. No questions asked. No money needed. They opened the doors at 7:15. Each tray was served with care, not thrown, not rushed. Every grilled cheese was cut diagonally. Every bowl of soup was swirled with cream and topped with a single leaf of basil. But it was the notes that hit hardest. Julian had written them the night before, scribbled on torn paper, takeout receipts, whatever he could find. "You matter. We're not invisible. This was made with love." An older man with sunburned skin and trembling fingers held his bowl like it was gold. "Ain't nobody cooked soup like this in 20 years, he said, voice cracking. "Not for me." A young boy opened his sandwich, smiled at the cheese pull, then looked up at Julian and whispered, "My mama used to make this before she got sick." Julian nodded. "Then this one's for her." Inside the kitchen, the clock ticked down. The food dwindled, but the line kept growing. By 9:30, they were almost out. Julian reached for the last slice of bread and paused. He set it aside. That last meal wasn't for the line. It was for a gate. He wrapped it with care. Poured the final scoop of soup into a thermos. Folded one more note. "For all the meals we make that never get eaten." Nate looked at him. "You sure?" Julian nodded. "I have to leave one tray at one door." He drove alone. There's no radio, no music. Just the sounds of the city, a city that had watched him fall, and now, maybe he was watching him rise in a different way. He reached the estate just before sunrise. Parked down the street. Walked the rest of the way. The gate was still. No cameras. Moved. No guards in sight. He set the tray down gently. Stoop sandwich. Note. No revenge. No accusation. Just food. A peace offering in butter and bread. He stepped back, looked at it once, then turned to leave. but as he walked away, a light clicked. On behind the trees, and somewhere in that quiet mansion, Keanu Reeves stirred from sleep. ChatGPT said. The sun hadn't fully broken over the horizon when Julian stepped away from the iron gate, leaving behind the tray, the thermos, and the note. Dew clung to the grass underfoot. The city was just beginning to hum awake, but up here, in the hills, it was still quiet, too quiet. As he walked back toward his car, parked under the shadow of a jacaranda tree, something inside him wavered. This wasn't closure. It wasn't even defiance. It was something else, something unspoken. He paused with his hand on the car door, looking back one last time. The tray sat undisturbed. The cream in the soup was starting to blur its spiral. He got in and drove away. Back in the estate, the hallway lights flicked on one by one. Upstairs, Keanu Reeves stood barefoot at the edge of his kitchen, robe hanging loose over his shoulders, eyes drawn to the security monitor that showed the front gate. He squinted at the image. A figure walking away, a tray left behind. He pressed a button on the intercom. Show me. Last 10 minutes at the gate. The feed rewound. And there, in high resolution, was Julian placing the meal gently, smoothing the napkin under the bowl, tucking the note beneath the sandwich. Keanu's breath caught. He disappeared from the camera, then reappeared minutes later at the gate, barefoot still, hair unkempt. He picked up the tray with both hands as if it might fall apart. The steam had faded, but the scent, it was unmistakable. Grilled cheese? Tomato soup? Tuesday? He lifted the note. The writing was familiar. For all the meals we make that never get eaten. He stared at it for a long time, then turned and walked slowly back into the house. Meanwhile, Julian had returned to the outreach center, but something was wrong. People were outside the building, not in line, but crowded near the door, whispering, anxious. Lonnie waved him over. You need to come see this. Inside, on the floor of the kitchen, was a stack of papers. Copies. Someone had printed the termination letter, in bulk, and stapled it to a flyer. The headline read, Celebrity Chef Fired for Theft Feeds, Homeless with Stolen Ingredients. Beneath it, a blurry photo of Julian holding a pot. Someone must have snapped it during setup without permission. David grabbed one of the pages, crumpled it. This came from somewhere up high. Who's trying to bury you, Jay? Julian didn't answer, just stood there, jaw clenched, holding the paper with one hand and the wooden spoon with the other. Outside, the crowd swelled. Not angry. Just confused. Some scared. Some defensive. Is it true? One woman asked. Did he steal the food? Another murmured. Julian looked around. At the trays, the tables, the volunteers. This food came from my home, he said, raising his voice, calm but unwavering. From my pockets. From friends. From people who believed feeding someone wasn't a crime. Someone clapped. Then another man shouted. Doesn't matter where it came from. Matters where it went. Cheers followed. But inside, Julian knew this wasn't over. He stepped into the pantry, pulled out his phone, and dialed the last number he thought he'd ever call again. It rang once, then twice, then Julian. Keanu's voice was hoarse, quiet. We need to talk, Julian said. Someone's trying to end this before it begins. Silence. On the other end, then a breath. I know, Keanu said. Come to the house. Now. ChatGPT said. The gates opened without hesitation this time. No intercom, no delay. Just the soft mechanical groan of iron parting to welcome him back in. Julian drove slowly up the familiar gravel path, headlights sweeping across the manicured hedges and the pale stone of the estate. For a moment, everything looked exactly as it always had, perfect, serene, detached from the noise of the world. But something had shifted. The front door stood ajar, and Keanu Reeves was already outside, waiting in a gray hoodie and worn jeans, barefoot again. His eyes looked heavier now, like he hadn't slept in days. But when he saw Julian step out of the car, he gave a slow nod. Not one of greeting, but of recognition. Come in, Keanu said, voice low. We need to talk in private. Julian followed him inside. The kitchen lights were still off, but the scent of the soup lingered faintly in the air. Had left sat clean in the sink, the spoon washed and placed gently on a towel. They moved past it into the study. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a laptop screen and a single desk lamp. Papers were scattered everywhere as seats. Inventory sheets, kitchen logs, timestamps, photos. "I found it," Keanu said, pulling a file from the mess. "The report that got you fired. It was falsified." He handed Julian the paper. The signature at the bottom didn't belong to Keanu. It belonged to Nadia. She claimed missing. Inventory. Said she saw you loading ingredients into your car. I never saw that report. She sent it straight to legal, with a forged approval. Julian blinked, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. Why? Keanu hesitated, then turned his laptop around. A paused video filled the screen, a grainy security recording from 3 weeks ago. Nadia, standing in the walk-in cooler, stuffing vacuum-sealed Wagyu into a designer tote. Keanu pressed play. In the footage, she moved with confidence, not rushed. "Not afraid. She was stealing from me," he said quietly. "And when she realized you were starting to ask questions, she buried me first." Julian finished. Keanu nodded. And now, someone's helping her spread that story. Someone with reach. Maybe a PR firm, maybe something bigger. I don't know yet. Julian leaned against the edge of the desk. The weight of it all pressed into his chest. They passed out copies of that letter at the shelter this morning. Turned what we did into a scandal. People were scared to eat. Keanu's jaw tightened. That ends now. He stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a folder. Inside was a rough sketch. A blueprint. A restaurant, no prices listed, just tables, chairs, and open kitchen. Handwritten across the top. Mama Rios. Julian stared. "You drew this?" Keanu shrugged. "I've been thinking about it since the first time you served me that soup." Dignity isn't just served on white linen. He placed the sketch on the desk. Then another chiton offer of partnership. Not employer and employee. Equals. "We build it together," Keanu said. "We fund it ourselves. And if anyone tries to smear it again, we invite cameras in. Not for show, but for truth." Julian was quiet for a long time. Then he took the spoon from his coat pocket and set it on the table between them. "We do it for her," he whispered. "For Mama Rosa." Keanu smiled. "And for everyone." Still hungry in the dark? They shook hands, not with fanfare, not with press releases. Just two men who had been through fire choosing to cook something new from the ashes. But outside, parked just across the street in the dark, an unmarked black SUV idled with its lights off. Inside, a man with a camera lens and a recording device watched the estate closely, clicking once, then again. The takedown wasn't over. It was just beginning. It started with a leak. 2 days after Julian and Keanu shook hands over the spoon, a video surfaced online. Grainy, edited, taken out of context. Julian loading trays into the trunk of his car. No sound, no explanation. Just the text across. The screen in bold white font. Keanu Reeves' disgraced chef caught stealing. Was it all a publicity stunt? The video hit 1 million views by noon. By sunset, it had climbed to 3 top talk shows speculated. Influencers fanned the flames. Conspiracy theorists painted Julian as a mastermind grifter who had manipulated Hollywood's most humble star. By midnight, there were drones flying over the estate and camera crews outside Street Jude's. The shelter's board began to panic. Sponsors pulled out. One donor emailed Julian directly, "I thought you were feeding people, not feeding your ego." It was brutal, and calculated. Julian sat on the floor of his apartment, back against the wall, the wooden spoon beside him. Across the room, his phone buzzed, endlessly calls from old friends. Hate mail from strangers, journalists pretending to just want to hear his side. He didn't move. Not yet. Not until the knock came at the door. Keanu stood there. Up, glasses on, 2 coffees in hand. No security. No entourage. It's just him. They want us to fold, he said, setting the drinks down. But what if we don't? Julian didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up the spoon and turned it over in his hand like it might give him the words. If we fight back, we make it real, he said softly. We make it louder. Keanu nodded. Good, let them hear us. The next morning, they released a video of their own. Simple, no editing. Just Julian and Keanu sitting in the shelter kitchen, side by side, with the spoon on the table between. Then Julian spoke first. I was fired without warning. Oh, goodbye. No chance to explain. But instead of disappearing, I used what I had left to feed the city. And now, they're trying to twist that into something ugly. Keanu leaned in. I've spent most of my life avoiding cameras. But today, we need them. Because this story isn't about scandal. It's about hunger, about dignity, about what happens when someone decides to serve anyway. They posted it without hashtags, without paid reach, raw and direct. Within hours, it went viral. It's not because it was designed to, but because it was true. Celebrities began sharing it. Chefs across the country filmed their own clips, making grilled cheese and tomato soup in solidarity. #MARIOS started trending in 23 cities, and in the middle of that whirlwind, something else happened. A woman named Camila, who had once slept in her car with 2 kids and a broken heater, emailed Julian. Double quotes, I run a halfway house in Long Beach, she wrote. I got 6 mouths to feed and nothing but 2 pots and an old grill. I'll cook with you, even if it's just beans. The floodgates opened. Volunteers from Compton, Bakersfield, Oakland, culinary students, church ladies, formerly incarcerated, men who once worked in prison kitchens, all reaching out. Already Mama Rios wasn't just a place now. It was a movement, and it scared someone. Deeply. That same night, the outreach center was broken into. Someone slashed the soup bags, knocked over trays, scrawled fraud across the walk-in fridge in red spray. Paint. Julian stood at the door in silence. The mess was heartbreaking but familiar. Like the early days of every revolution, Keanu arrived 20 minutes later. He didn't say a word, just rolled up his sleeves and started cleaning. Julian followed. Then David. Then Lonnie. Then strangers. By dawn, the kitchen gleamed. Again, the smell of soup rising like incense from the stove. Julian stepped outside and found a reporter waiting. You gonna give a statement about the vandalism? Julian looked past her to the growing line down the block. People hungry, tired, but waiting. He shook his head. I'm gonna give him breakfast. And he turned back inside where the spoon waited in the ladle holder, stained, scarred, but ready. The rain came unexpectedly that morning, soft at first, like a blessing whispered across the city's tired shoulders. But then it thickened cold, steady, relentless. By the time the volunteers began arriving at the site where Mama Rios was being built, their jackets were soaked and their shoes heavy with mud. The foundation was still exposed, steel and concrete. Surrounded by scaffolding and silence, the ribbon cutting was supposed to be 2 weeks away. But after the vandalism, the growing attacks, online, and a second cease and desist letter from a faceless firm that claimed intentional brand defamation, things had slowed. Donations were stuck, permits were frozen, even the contractor had quietly pulled out. But Julian stood in the rain anyway, umbrella discarded, he clinging to his arms as he stared at the shell of the future. Beside him, Keanu pulled up in a nondescript gray truck, windows fogged, hair still damp from his morning shower. They're trying to starve the dream, Julian muttered. Not with bullets, with silence, delays, paperwork, fear. Keanu nodded slowly, stepping beside him. You know what Mama Rosa would have done? Keep cooking, Julian whispered. And so they did. They took the movement off Dash Grid. Over the next 3 weeks, they moved through the city like a quiet storm. Pop-up kitchens and alleys, rooftop dinners where everyone paid what they could. Food trucks with no logos, only a note taped to the window. This meal is already paid for by someone who believes in you. People started sharing stories again. Not headlines. Stories. Like the ex-nurse who made soup out of donated bone broth and turmeric. The former gang member teaching 10-year-olds how to slice onions without crying. A woman who had once stolen to eat but now ran a pantry from the back of her pickup. Hashma, MARIOS returned, but not as a location, as a code, a whisper, a badge of hope. Meanwhile, the campaign against Julian escalated. Local officials received anonymous complaints about health violations. Food trucks were ticketed for parking half an inch over the line. One night, Julian came home to find the spoon nailed to his door, split in half. He sat on the stoop, holding the broken halves like a relic from another life. He didn't cry, but something in him cracked. Keanu showed up 15 minutes later. He didn't speak, just handed Julian a folded cloth. Inside was another spoon, almost identical in shape, older, darker, burnished from decades of use. "This was from my mother's kitchen," Keanu said quietly. "I've had it since I was 15. If you're still cooking, this should be..." "With you?" Julian nodded, swallowed hard, and whispered, "I'm still cooking." 3 days later, a package arrived at the outreach center. No return address. Inside, a notarized affidavit from a former employee of the PR firm that had launched the smear campaign. Documents, audio recordings, payment records. A full confession. The company behind it was tied to a high-end restaurant group, one threatened by Mama Rios's rising influence. They'd tried to shut him down not because he was stealing, but because he was succeeding. Keanu called in a favor with a friend at the New York Times. By Sunday, the story was everywhere. He fed the city with love. They tried to destroy him. Now he's feeding the world. The backlash was instant. Donations tripled overnight. Volunteers flooded in. The city's food licensing department publicly apologized and fast-tracked every frozen permit. A major investor stepped forward, a young woman who had once eaten Julian's soup while living in her car and now ran a tech company. The construction resumed faster this time. Workers arrived early, left late. Artists painted murals on the outer walls, portraits of community, of resilience, hands offering food with no strings attached. On opening night, people lined the block in the rain. There was no red carpet, no speeches, just Julian, standing at the door with Keanu, greeting everyone with a smile and a simple line, "Welcome home." Inside, no one knew who paid and who didn't. No one cared. There were lawyers beside waiters, addicts beside architects, kids beside grandmothers, everyone eating the same grilled cheese and tomato soup, and in the center of the dining room, behind the open kitchen, was a glass frame, inside it 2 spoons, one split, one whole, and a note that read, "When the world breaks you, feed it anyway." As the night wore on, someone stood up near the front and clinked a spoon against their bowl. The room fell quiet. "I was one of the people who believed the lie," the man said. "I shared the video. I trashed his name. I was wrong." He looked at Julian, eyes wet. "Thank you for feeding me anyway." Julian didn't speak, just walked over, hugged the man, and poured him another bowl of soup outside. The rain finally stopped, the clouds parted, and Mama Rios wasn't just a restaurant. Now, it was a revolution.